Thank you for the opportunity to present open knowledge maps here today. I'm going to share my screen. For me, this is a bit of a homecoming because some of you might know I was a bibliometrics researcher before I founded open knowledge maps, and this work actually came out of my dissertation thesis. And yeah, I'm really happy to present this to you today. And I should also mention that these slides were co-created with fellow Open Knowledge Maps board member Maxi Schramm. So the general motivation for open knowledge maps is, I think, very well summed up in this picture by science, in this image. Especially in the coronavirus crisis, we've seen that a lot of knowledge was published in a very short time. At some point last year, the knowledge was doubling every 20 days, and we have now north of 200,000 papers on the topic. And that makes it very hard to get an overview of the field, and once you have it, to then keep it. But I think it's not just coronavirus research. We see an explosion of knowledge in all scientific fields. And this brings about many problems for the exploration, for the discovery of research outputs. And we can also see that in the numbers. So we still have a relatively high unsightedness of publications, between 7 and 63%, depending on the discipline. This rises up to 85% when we talk about data sets. So this was a study that I was still involved in 2016 that we conducted. And where it gets really bleak is the transfer to practice. So even in application-oriented disciplines, medicine, only a small amount of research is transferred to practice, and if so, with a considerable delay. So I think we can say that there is a discoverability crisis, and it negatively affects the efficiency, the quality, the impact, and the visibility of science. And one of the reasons that we are in discoverability crisis is the tools that we're using to this day, because for discovery, for search, search engines still reign supreme, and Google Scholar is the queen of all search engines. But how do you actually get an overview of a scientific topic using Google Scholar? Well, what most people would do, me included, is to type in the topic and then hit enter. And then you're presented with hundreds of thousands, oftentimes millions of results. Since you cannot read that many papers, most people do is they turn to a highly cited overview work, go through this one, go through the references, and then start the citation surfing. And with time and patience, you can then develop a mental model of the field that is, you know, the most important topics, the most important authors, the most important publications. But essentially, this is a process that takes very long, weeks, months, and this is time that we don't have in a pandemic. And actually, in almost all research, discovery is a process that falls short. And we just have these blind spots and these things that we don't see and that we cannot take into account. And this was one of the starting points for open knowledge maps. We are a charitable nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to dramatically improving the quality of scientific knowledge. And we want to do that for science, but also for the other stakeholders in society, because it's difficult for researchers to get into an unknown field, but for everyone outside the system, this becomes exponentially harder. And we're building now on top of knowledge maps. In the jargon, you would rather say knowledge domain visualization, but we shortened it sort of to knowledge maps. And as you know, they have a number of advantages over a list-based interface in that you can see the main areas at a glance, and then you have resources related to each area, so you can get immediately started. Also, the closeness of the areas is something about their relative subject similarity. So in this example, risk factors is closer to types of diseases than it is to prevention. From the theory to the practice, since this is a video, I'm going to try and optimize for the video clip. So this is our interface. At the moment, we have included 2 data sources on which you can create your own knowledge map. The first one is PubMed, the big database in life sciences. And the second is the Bielefeld Academic Search Engine base, which now gives an overview of around 270 million articles, or outputs, so you can really search in any discipline. You can then type in the topic that you're interested in, for example, digital education, and we will then create the knowledge map for you. It looks very similar to the example that I showed you. So the bubbles represent the subtopics, in this case, education systems. Then down here, education policy and digital literacy. And once you've identified an area that you're interested in, for example, let's say this bubble here up on digital competence, you can then zoom into it and you can inspect the papers, publications that are related to it. You can look at the metadata. And if a paper is open source, like this one, you can even read the article within the same interface. So the advantages that we see is that you can get this bird's eye view of a field. You can identify relevant concept, which is often the most difficult step in any discovery process. You can sort the relevant from the irrelevant, depending on your research question, your information need. And Open Knowledge Maps is an interface over all scientific knowledge, open and closed. But we'll always make it very easy to get to the open content, and we also offer additional services for it. With this approach, we've become the largest visual search engine for research. We've had more than 1 million visits on our website since May 2016. More than 350,000 maps have been created, and we had more than 3,500 participants in our workshops. We're also honored to receive the Austrian Prize for Free Knowledge and the Open Minds Award. So the question that's probably on all of your minds is, how does it actually work? Well, our knowledge maps provide a topical overview for your search term, and they are based on the 100 most relevant documents from either base or PubMed, depending on your search term. So while you're waiting for the knowledge map to be created, we connect to the search API of the service that you have selected, and we request the 100 most relevant documents. And then we pull the metadata onto our service, and we do basically a cohort occurrence analysis, and we look at text similarity to create the knowledge map. In more particular terms, we first start with the pre-processing, the cleaning, deduplication. We also try to infer keywords, because we use keywords later on for the labeling. And then we create the features, in our case, the cohort metrics. This matrix is then used in a clustering process and in a labeling process. So the labeling is based on PFIDF on the keywords. And then we have 2 layout processes for first non-metric multidimensional scaling and force-directed layout, which happens on the client in order to pull out the different entities and make everything readable. And that creates the map representation. And this is then moved over to the interface. And in the interface is sort of the second aspect, the research aspect that I'd like to go into today. And these are the cognitive aspects. And they are often overlooked, but we think that they are crucial for the success of tools like Open Knowledge Maps. So we took into account the cognitive load. So this means restricting the number of elements in each view and not overloading the working memory with too many elements at the same time. There's also a phenomenon called change blindness. So when a scene starts, for example, in a movie, then at the end of the scene, you cannot actually remember how the scene started. And that is bad news for visualizations, because many of them use animations. And so you have to provide a lot of context for orientation. We think it's best to only use them when they're really necessary. And finally, recognition. So we think it's important to use well-known metaphors from the real world. And that is why, for example, in Open Knowledge Maps, the papers are represented as paper icons and not as another circle, because we think that really helps with easy understanding of the maps. But maybe your question is now, what about metrics? Right? This is the LIS-Bibliometrics Conference. How are metrics involved in open knowledge maps? Well, I should say that the first prototype of Head Start, which is the software behind open knowledge maps, was based actually on co-readership data. So this was the topic of my thesis, and the visualization was actually more of an output at the end. And so what many people have found that publications that are often read together, for example, they're in the same library of a reference management system, then there are of a similar subject. And I also found that for references in Mendeley in my dissertation. And then I used that relationship to create the very first Head Start visualization on the topic of education and technology. And later on, people got really interested and they wanted to use it on arbitrary data. And so it was really a question of how can we actually connect it to a large pool of data. And this is also where the team first came into place, because we found that co-readership data is not available on a large scale. It was not back then, and to my best of my knowledge, it's not available today. And that's why we moved to co-word occurrence when developing open knowledge maps. But there are still two areas where we use metrics today, or two examples as to how we use metrics today in open knowledge maps. And for that, I'm going to quickly stop my screen share and share a different window with you. Yes, so the first occurrence of metrics is if you switch to the PubMed integration and then type in a term of interest. For example, you want to know about the medical research into basketball. And then in the map, we can see different subtopics. And for example, this bubble down here, you may be interested in activity classification, activity demands of basketball, and then you can zoom into it. And what we've done in the PubMed integration is that we actually use PMC citations to scale the papers within the bubbles, but then also the bubbles according to the sum of the citations of the papers. And we hope with this to give an indication of what might be a good paper to start with. So in this case, you can see it's a systematic review. So these tend to attract a lot of citations, but they're also maybe a good starting point for someone who is not familiar with the field. At the same time, we hope with this kind of annotation to not create too much of a ranking between the different papers, because everything else is still there and it's still in kind of the context of the other papers topically and should be also read and considered. And in a second project, we actually looked at this further. This is Viper, the Visual Project Explorer. And here you can search the OpenAIRE database for projects, such as, for example, the Every Sound project. And we then create a knowledge map of the output of this project. So this is what this particular European Union project produced. So we can see it deals with sound event detection and things like that, urban acoustic scenes. They have actually also published a lot of data sets. So when there is a border like this, then it's a data set. But we have interminated this with the papers. And then you can actually down here decide how you want to scale the map. So you can use citations. These ones are taken actually from Crossref. As we can see, it already rescales the map. So especially this bubble seems to be, this part of the project seems to be cited very well. But then we have also included altmetrics. And for example, if you want to know about the attention, you can switch to tweets. And then suddenly this bubble pops up. And this is because this paper has received a lot of tweets. And in 2019, deep learning was definitely a hot topic. It may still be now. So it's not a surprise that this really received a lot of attention also on Twitter. So this might be something where you can see what has received what attention. Yeah, I I was a bibliometrics researcher, and so for me it's very important to also contextualize this. And we have included here a note on the use of metrics in this interface. We created actually an advisory board also for the project to guide us metrics-wise. And one of the suggestions was to include this note that the metrics should not be used for evaluative purposes, and that people should consider relevant guidelines, such as the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics. So our main goal is always discovery and not evaluation, and our tools are actually not built to perform evaluations. Right, so now I'm going to again switch back to my presentation. Right, so we have seen this. Yeah, I've said a lot of we. So who we actually, we're a team that is headquartered in Vienna in Austria, but we have members from around the world. We also have an organizational member. Part of us are employees, part of us are volunteers, and we've been developing this system now almost 5 years together. There are some people who were with us for some time that are not in the picture. So this is the current core team. And we also found supporting members because we are an open infrastructure, and so we need the support of the research community to do what we're doing. And we're very happy that we found this group of 10 initial supporting members, and we're looking to expand this because our services are in high demand. We've also seen in the pandemic a jump in the usage, definitely. And we still keep everything free and open. So that includes our search and discovery services. We also have training materials under CC BY. All of our training activities are usually for free unless they're embedded in a larger event. Our visualization software is licensed under MIT and available from GitHub, and we also run community support and engagement programs such as the Enthusiasts program, where we connect with people from all around the world who are ambassadors, power users of open knowledge maps, and they then conduct talks, workshops in their own communities and bring the feedback back to us. And that enables us to include needs and requirements from different parts of the world that we can rarely go to. And in our latest effort to get even closer to the research organizations that we're serving, we're now developing custom services, and this should enable research organizations to harness the full potential of open knowledge maps. They can give a better overview of the resources and collections in their own houses, and we do this by enabling them to embed open knowledge maps components in their own services and based on their own data. How will that look like? These services are very much in development right now, so these are just use cases at this point. But for example, you could imagine that there is a university that has a very specific collection, like a cartoon archive, but that could also be a research data management system. And then they could provide a search over this collection, a visual search. And for example, in the cartoon archive, then provide a map of political cartoons to their users. Open knowledge maps could also be used to complement an existing list-based interface, such as the ones that many university libraries have already installed for their clients. And then they could also embed a knowledge map as an alternative view, an alternative way to look at the data that the organization is providing. And finally, open knowledge maps components can be included almost everywhere. For example, also on blog posts where organizations are highlighting their own research. The way this works is essentially that the institutions send their data to base, and from there we can access it, and then we provide the custom service components, and the institutions can decide on which data sets they want to, or on which data sources they want to base it on, maybe only the ones within their institution, or maybe only the ones in a certain region or a certain country, and then they can embed the components as cloud components. Another way would to install open knowledge maps on their own servers and simply use the open source software. This is sort of the second route. To finance all of this, we have developed a membership-based funding model. So the custom services will again be free and open for everyone, but we need institutions to chip in and help us with developing and maintaining these services. And so we propose that organizations become supporting members. They provide a yearly contribution. And in return, we invite them to co-create the platform with us as part of the board of supporters. They get 1/3 of the vote of what sources and what features are implemented on open knowledge maps. These are the 3 levels that we have, and they signify the number of seats you get on the board of supporters, but also whether you're interested more in maintaining open knowledge maps or really in further developing the system. Yeah, with that, I'm almost at the end. We're a community-driven initiative, so your support matters. Let us know what you think, provide us with feedback, introduce open knowledge maps to your students and colleagues if you think that the tool would be useful for them, and yeah, consider becoming a supporting member. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Peter. Zosha, do we have questions for Peter and open knowledge maps?
We do indeed. Just 2 at the moment. Feel free to add more in if anybody has any. So first one, Peter, from somebody wondering how complex of a PubMed search strategy the platform can handle. Coming from someone who's involved in systematic reviews, which would typically involve quite complex searches.
Yes, you can use the full query language of PubMed, and we also do not restrict the length of the query. And I think what we see open knowledge maps being used in systematic reviews at this point is really to create the seeds and to see if you have any blind spots in your query. So I think for this, open knowledge maps is really useful, but since we restrict it to 100 items, it probably cannot go the full way, but kind of in this initial phase and in between when you want to check, we see a lot of usage of open knowledge maps for that.
I'm almost wondering now whether it would be how it might be used together with, for example, one of the tools that we were introduced to on last week's session, where you to create seeds for machine learning to sort through document sets. So, for example, if you used something like your tool to search for those seeds from the most relevant papers and then fed that information to something else. Anyway, just sprung to mind. Okay, so that on the back of that, has anybody done anything
actually,
like that?
it has happened already. I did not expect that, but
really,
there is a publication, yes, that used open knowledge maps for that exact or almost this exact purpose, and that was one of the big surprises early on of the surprising uses of the tool.
Right. If you have a reference to that, I'd be very interested to read it. Thank you. Okay, so I think that is those are the only 2 questions that have come in so far. Yeah, that's only ones that I can see. Stephen, did you have anything?
No, I was just reflecting what you said, Peter, about this use that you hadn't anticipated in this recent paper, and that was touched on in the panel debate. You know, we've ended up with unintended consequences of the use of bibliometrics, but there are also creative possibilities through innovation, aren't there? and it's a challenge to manage those two aspects, that we don't want to stifle innovation, but we don't want to end up in a dead end with bad consequences. So I wondered how you think about the potential and maybe the right uses for the product as you've created it and it gets used.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, I'd really like to invite everyone in the room and beyond that to comment and give us feedback on our use of metrics, because actually we rarely get any feedback on that specific part. And that was actually surprising to me, because when I sort of was already moving towards the open knowledge maps, there was so much debate around the responsible use of metrics. And so I expected, you know, when we put out a product that actually uses metrics, we will get a lot of feedback, but we actually don't. And so I'd be really interested to hear from you how you think or how you feel about the use of metrics. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do use them for discovery, because we just cannot do without them. There's no way we qualitatively can sort through 200,000 COVID papers. And I think we're also seeing how overloaded the peer reviewers are on the preprints there at the moment, and that this has become a big issue, right? So we need the help of machine learning and other techniques to really be able to sort through everything. But I sternly believe that you can be either a good discovery tool or you can be a good sort of evaluation tool. You cannot be both. And so we are definitely going towards the discovery, and we're strongly into that direction. And so actually we will always put kind of this disclaimer that the knowledge maps should not be in any way used for evaluation at this point. They're really for discovery, for exploration, for serendipity, for all these things, like for finding the results from South Africa, right? Cap also the languages or the types of outputs, right? We take everything and you can search the full breadth, but it really is not suited to any sort of evaluation, I think. And that's really important for us. And we always kind of push back when people try to push us into that direction.
That's great. Thanks for that. I don't think we have any more questions, do we, Sasha?
No, not. Oh, hang on. Something just popped up into you now.
Oh, sorry. Yes, there was
yes.
one which was about. Oh, sorry, Sasha, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it was somebody wondering whether, if through machine learning, knowledge maps, open knowledge maps could exclude the predatory journals that are already indexed by PubMed.
So what was that? Proprietary or predatory journals?
Predatory.
Oh yeah, well that's an important point for us, and one thing that we definitely want to include is actually the DOHA seal of approval, and also an indication of whether a journal is listed in the DOHA. So we know there are a lot of issues around credibility of journals, and this is the first step that we're taking towards that. I personally don't believe too much in blacklisting and just excluding content. That has not been our policy, but we also, of course, welcome all input in that area. And actually, we do get more input in that area than we actually get on the metrics. So yes, but please keep it coming and let us know if you find something that might not be useful. And then, you know, that's often a good starting point to look at various examples and then understand actually how we can counter any bad tendencies.